Dear friends, dear comrades, my name is Vijay Prashad. I am the director of Tricontinental Institute for Social Research, and I am very pleased to join you as you meet in Rome to discuss the question of communism, its past and its future, the impact of communism's past on impacts of communism's future. My presentation, just sort of drawing from that, is called October of the Past and the Anticipated October, or October of the Future. In order to make this presentation make sense, I want to deliver it in two parts. Each part has 5 main points, which I'll underline pretty deliberately. The first part of the presentation is about the October of the past. In other words, the impact that the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 had on revolutionary developments, particularly in Asia and Africa. That'll be the first part, October of the past. The second part of the presentation will be about anticipated Octobers, Octobers that we are waiting for. And that will also come with 5 main points. So here's part one, October past. It's very important as the first point, very important to underscore that there would have been no deep revolutionary movement of the character that we saw in at least the continents of Africa and Asia without October. The Bolshevik Revolution was a great inspiration to people who were fighting for national liberation, understanding that national liberation could not merely mean the bourgeoisie in their countries taking power, but there had been no real sense that this is possible. The horizon of possibility in the 19th century for people fighting in Africa and Asia against colonialism was principally national liberation, the end of colonial domination. But October opened a new horizon. It allowed people to imagine the possibility of going from national liberation towards socialism. And this brings us to the second point. The second point is that October itself was the unity of national liberation and socialism. Bear in mind that in 1915, 2 years before the October Revolution, Lenin wrote a series of articles on the right of nations to self-determination. The reason Lenin was so fixated on the question of national liberation was that within the Tsarist Empire, Lenin observed that in large parts, not only in Central Asia, amongst the people of Bukhara, the Uzbeks, the Tatars, and so on, but also, of course, in the western part of Russia, where in Dagestan and so on, you had a number of suppressed nationalities. These nationalities would be along the rim of what is today's Russia, including the Ukrainians, the Georgians, and others. And therefore, Lenin articulated an analysis of the right of nations to self-determination. It's a very important point because those essays, when written about in the international media, were, as Ho Chi Minh put it, a light opening up in the sky, a sun brightening in the sky, because radicals like Ho Chi Minh and others read Lenin's thinking on the right of nations to self-determination and understood that what happened in October 1917 in the Tsarist Empire, which had become slowly a republic with the February Revolution, but by October what had accelerated was indeed the unity of national liberation and socialism, because that's precisely what the Soviet Republic then became, the union of Soviet socialist republics. the different republics representing different nationalities. This unity of national liberation and socialism was within October itself and was something that inspired revolutionaries all around the world. The third point is that October proved that both national liberation and socialism was possible. In other words, in pretty backward countries, Russia being a backward country, a peasant society, not much advanced industrialization, in a country like Russia, it was possible for a revolution to both revolutionize society, democratize society, get rid of landlordism, get rid of old feudal customs, and accelerate the development of the forces of production. The immense achievement of the first 5-year plan, during which, through the voluntary, disciplined activity of members of the Russian and then Soviet Communist Party, their disciplined sacrifice enabled the Russian people and other minorities to overcome literacy, to overcome a range of social ills that needed to be transformed. October proved that national liberation and socialism was possible, that you didn't need to first develop capitalism and then develop socialism. That was simply not necessary. You could, in fact, both develop socialism and at the same time overcome the maladies of a feudal society, of a backward society. You didn't have to go through capitalism. This was a great lesson learned through the experience of October. It wasn't just voluntarist, it wasn't just the idealistic expectation that you could leap over capitalism. The Soviets proved it with the first and second 5-year plans when they accelerated the development of the productive forces. Incredible creation of public housing for people, public hospitals, the public healthcare movement in the Soviet Union was remarkable. The fourth point, in terms of October's past, the fourth point is that October itself provided support for revolutionaries all across Africa and Asia. This was through the establishment in 1919 of the Communist International. It's pretty remarkable. Here's a revolution, takes place in 1917. The young Soviet Republic is attacked from all sides by the imperialists. All the imperialists gathered together to invade the Soviet Republic. Nonetheless, the Soviet Union decides, in the middle of that attack, the failure of the German Revolution in 1919, the failure of the Hungarian Revolution, nonetheless, the Soviet leadership decides to call upon revolutionaries from around the world to come together in Moscow, then to gather in Baku for the great conference on the East, to gather in these various conferences to start discussing how to provide material support to revolutionaries around the world, be they more nationalist than socialist. Even that was permissible. Lenin understood that as early as 1913 in his essay Backward Europe, Advanced Asia, where he talked about the great revolutions taking place in Iran, in China, and so on. That's the fourth point, that October provided material support for revolutionaries in Asia and Africa. The fifth point is that after the process of decolonization, when states began to get their freedom, there was an alliance between the Third World and October. This alliance actually goes all the way to the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Right through the 1980s, the Soviet Union provided material support for revolutionaries all around the world, including the Palestinians, who received material support from the USSR. In fact, it's arguable that the collapse of the USSR in 1991 led the Palestinians into negotiations that resulted in the Oslo agreements of 1994. So these are the 5 points. One, communism in Asia and Africa needed October. Two, October was the unity of national liberation and socialism. Three, October proved that both national liberation and socialism was possible. Four, October provided material support for the revolutionaries in Asia and Africa as they struggled for freedom. And five, having won freedom, there was an alliance shaped between the Third World and October. The place where you could see this alliance is the creation of the non-aligned movement. Before that, the Bandung meeting, and subsequently the assistance provided by the Soviet Union to the young post-colonial nations. Part 2, anticipating October. See, these are very difficult times we live in, and yet in many parts of the world, the struggle for communism and socialism has never ended. The Soviet Union fell, certainly, but most revolutionaries, at least in Asia and parts of Africa, never felt that the demise of the Soviet Union was the demise of the horizon of a communist society. That was never understood. Indeed, in these countries, the revolutionaries fought hard against the Americanist thesis of the end of history. So here are 5 points about anticipating October and offering, I think, a sensitive kind of solidarity for people as they continue to struggle to build socialism, whether it's in China or in Cuba, or it's very difficult socialist processes in Venezuela, other parts of the world. So here are 5 theses on anticipating October. The first thesis is that Octobers happened universally in the realm of necessity, what Marx and Engels called the realm of necessity. Octobers haven't happened in the realm of freedom. Marx anticipated October will come in Germany or in England. Didn't happen. No revolution in England, failed revolution in Germany. Octobers routinely have taken place in the realm of necessity. Russia, Vietnam, Mongolia, China, Korea, Cuba, and so on. Always the realm of necessity. People have had to leap beyond capitalism in one way or the other to move from colonized status to socialism. That was what October had proved, and which countries over and over again have been trying to do. Second, socialism is not an event. It doesn't take place. October 1st was the 75th anniversary of the start of the Chinese Revolution. The Chinese Revolution doesn't happen on October 1st, 1949. It's a process. It's not an event. It doesn't take place once and then you judge it. You can't take the Chinese Revolution and judge it against an abstraction called revolution. That is a Kantian approach to the theory of revolutions. As a Marxist, we look at the process, the dialectical unfolding of human history, not abstractions, so that those can be understood whether right or wrong. So the second point is socialism is a process. It's not an event. The third thesis is that there are always zigs and zags. At one point, Engels was writing about the progress of history. And at the time when Engels was considering this in the 19th century, Leopold von Ranke and other German historians were constructing the idea of modern history. And for them, history had a sort of abstract time that runs in a linear fashion from the past to the future. Engels contested that. Engels said that history is not the history of progress. Everything doesn't go in a linear fashion. History goes, he said, in zigs and zags. Indeed, in the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels had opened the question of the future. They said that the future will be determined not by history with a capital H, but history will be determined by the class struggle. They said either you go to socialism or to the common ruin of contending classes. That's the exact language in the manifesto. This is exactly where Rosa Luxemburg gets her formula, socialism or barbarism. It's either socialism or the common ruin of contending classes. So Engels wrote, history doesn't move in a straight line. History moves in zigs and zags, advances, retreats, advances and retreats. And we have to understand the history of socialism as well as zigs and zags. The fourth thesis, the collapse of the USSR was not a collapse of October. October itself had been demonstrated to be true by its history. The USSR lasted 70 years. 70 years is about the average lifespan of a human being. It's not enough to judge socialism or communism by. Capitalism has lasted hundreds of years. You walk down the street of Rome and you'll see homeless people. That itself should suggest that there's a problem with capitalism. After so many hundreds of years, you couldn't abolish homelessness. In the Soviet Union, in the 70 years, they abolished homelessness and then they collapsed. They collapsed for a host of reasons. The Soviet Union collapsed, but October did not collapse. I don't have time to get too much into this, but I want to put this on the table. Perhaps this could be discussed in a different forum, in a different way. The fifth thesis, which is very important, is that October persists. The search for October continues. What are we to say to the landless peasants of Brazil who are organized by the Landless Workers Movement of Brazil, the MST? What does one to say to the Tanzanian landless workers of Miwata? What are we to say to them? They are organized in the platform Miwata, which is a group that has built a platform for landless workers. Small farmers in Zimbabwe built Zimsoft, fighting every day for them to be visible, for their issues to be taken up in society, to democratize society. What can we say to the Indian farmers movement? Millions of farmers for a year barricaded the capital city of New Delhi. What are we to say to them? For them, October persists. They are not debating the end of history. They are not debating the niceties of communism. You see, Marx and Engels wrote in the German ideology, communism is the actual movement of history. Communism isn't what you and I want to impose on the world. Communism is the actual movement of history. It is for the communist militant to track the actual movement of history, the contradictions as they unfold, and through a political party to insert ourselves into that dynamic and try to move the class struggle in an accelerated way to benefit the immense majority. That's the task of both the interpreter of reality and those who want to help shape reality, to track the actual movement of history. And then as you begin to understand that actual movement, through being involved in building that actual movement at the same time, you drive history forward, you drive the class struggle in a way to influence the direction that things are going in. You accelerate the direction in one way or the other toward socialism or toward the common ruin of the contending classes. That's the only two choices you have. So October persists. Demoralization in this or that part of the world, it's not for us. We look out of the window wherever we live in the global south and we see the persistence of October. What I would say to our comrades who live in the north, where precariousness and loneliness is destroying society, I would say seek out the actual movement of history. Put your shoulder to the wheel. October is winking at you. The red sun of October is in the sky. Don't ignore it. It's not a red light. It's not telling you to stop. That red light outside your window is the sun of October. Take heat from it and forward march. Thanks a lot.